today open on the future of Iranian Kurdistan. Thank you for Team of Labour or Kurdish National Congress for arrange this meeting. Today we are discussing of the future of Iranian Kurdistan, where they consider the future of the Kurdish national movement in Iran. Ongoing tension across the region and current economic and social condition for Kurdish in Iran. And today our panelists we are talking about discussing continued movement for self-determination and the ongoing fight against discrimination and prejudice for Iranian Kurds. Consider what the future holds for Kurdish in Iran. And I want to just say, when you just titled said the future of Iranian Kurdistan, is my opinion is don't have any Kurdistan name, Iranian Kurdistan. Kurdistan only just you can say Kurdistan north, south, east, or west, because a lot of people said Iranian Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, Turkey Kurdistan, but this one is the right way said North Kurdistan is Turkish party, South Kurdistan is Iraqi party, East Kurdistan is Syrian, and West Kurdistan is Iranian. That's the right way says it like that. And today we got three panelists. One of them is Mr. Zardash Horami, he's here. Other two panelists, Mehri Razi or Sonia Karimi. We got some issue for vaccination in outside in hotel, maybe the students fix it and come to join our panel. And I wanted just now to Mr. Zardash to speaking when it is time just his finished speech. Other panelists is coming to here.
Thank you so much for everyone who dare organize this event. My name is Zardash. I'm representing the PAJAK, the Kurdistan Free Life Party. The future of Iranian Kurdistan. Firstly, we will briefly explore the past 4 decades of Islamic Republic rule, an oppressive religion system that is moving away from human values, democracy and peace in region and the international sphere year by year. Despite all the pressure from inside and outside to change these policies, the government is not willing to reform its political and social structure. Not only did the sanction fail to bring the Islamic Republic to the negotiation table, it brought extreme economic hardship to the people. To compensate for the economic shortfalls, the Islamic Republic has partly founded the damaging operation in Yemen, Iran, Afghanistan, Lebanon, and Syria. They are increasing the shipment of the narcotic of drug trade to European and South Asia countries through the Iraq and Afghan air fleet, disguising them as a general good and using the international trade and commerce route from the Turkey. During the 24th years, the Islamic regime has ruled the states of the women autonomy, and the rise of the oppressed civilian have diminished day by day. Extensive mismanagement, the implementations of the corrupt policies, and the promotion of the state terrorism inside and outside of Iran has led to profound social, political, economic, and environmental crises. Rising poverty, unemployment, corruption, water scarcity, increased arrested of the civilian and political activists, execution and the torture, combined with the prolific narcotic abuse and international distrust due to the unclear activity and policy in Iran are example of the some of the crises of the regime faces. However, what is the important is that the Iranian citizens have changed their views and activists towards the integrity of the system in the last 10 years. During the many protests of the past few years, particularly in the Kurdish, Baluch, Arab, and Persian regions, people did not remain silent and managed to find common ground to support each other in every way. Previously, people were reluctant to protest in the streets and of all the problems and disputes the society faces. However, in the past few years, the people have called for the overthrow of the system and the transformation of the all structure in the departure of the head of the state. With the current situation of the Islamic Republic, it is not able to solve the existing crisis or commit to any reform. For this reason, we will see as increases in nationwide protested in the near future. The Islamic Republic has made the necessary preparation to deal with this protest with two possible eventualities. First, their experience of the Syrian civil war had led to Iran seeking allied agreement with other Islamic extremists such as the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, the Salafi, and the Iranian Islamic Brotherhood. The understanding between them is that if there is any uprising in Iran, these groups can act against the people in their area. The agreement of the Islamic Republic of Iran with extremist groups such as Muslim Brotherhood and Salafi in Eastern Kurdistan, Rojava, are interfering in the interior affair of the people more than ever. In the Arab regions, Iraqi Popular Mobilization, the called Hashd Sha'bi force, in central Iran, Hezbollah forces, and in the Baluch area, Taliban affiliated force have been recognized. In the last few months, the Salafis have been known to harass women for the dressing incorrectly according to Sharia law. Secondly, the new government's cabinet is led by the person who was responsible for the mass execution of thousands of the prisoners and civilians in Iran between 1988 and 1992. The government should be met with more radical interior and external protest than in the past. In addition to the fact that there are no women in the main cabinet, the current number of the women in parliament is lower than in the past. The current situation in Iran is tense. The cabinet is being ruled with an iron fist, and only those who complete loyalty to the Iranian leader Khamenei have retained their position. In a new move, Ibrahim Raisi has begun to increase the pressure on the Iraqi government to demand the exclusion of the Kurdish opposition forces in northern Iraq. The revolutionary Quds have attacked with the drones and the airplanes several times in the past month, attacking the Kurdish opposition parties based in Iraqi Kurdistan. An airstrike on Erbil airport could turn Iraqi Kurdistan into the proxy battlefield between Turkey and Iran because of the great interests of the world powerful governments, including the United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, Germany, and the more recently China. The relation to even of the Middle East are evolving daily. There is no fixed understanding on how this will end. For example, the Taliban in Afghanistan, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthi in Yemen, the Islamic Brotherhood in Turkey, and ISIS in both Iraq and Syria, increasing their hegemonic power over all. The political might of the China and Russia has increased due to military and economic support of the dictatorship in both Iran and either region. Over the last 40 years, jihadist movements have been more active and mobilizing than ethnic and national movements in the Middle East. Jihadist movements have replaced nationalist and democratic movement. The withdrawal of the NATO troops from Afghanistan somehow increasing Iran's motivation for military interest more in Iraq and Syria. Iran and Turkey, under the pretext of seeking their opponents in the Iraqi part of the Kurdistan, are seeking to return to their political borders after the Lausanne Agreement. If we look at the history of the Iranian struggle during the Islamic Republic regime, the Kurdish region has always been the base of the armed struggle against the dictatorship, including Iranian regime. On the other hand, the society of the East Kurdistan, Rojava, is a secular and active society which supports democracy in Iran. The Islamic Republic has always planned to attack the Kurdish people in order to intimidate the Iranian movement and the Iranian civilians. Meanwhile, the presence of the Quds Force, an intelligence organization in Iraqi Kurdistan, alongside to position of the forces to East Kurdistan, in that part has always faced serious threats. Particularly in the last year, several members of the PJAK and Democratic Party of the Kurdistan, Iran, and political and human rights activists were being killed or terrored by the Iranian intelligence service in the northern Iraq, which is we call the Bashur or Iranian Kurdistan. Contrary to the policy of the centralism, PJAK, the Kurdistan Free Life Party, wants to divide power among the people by railing and playing on the system of the self-government and formation of the local councils. The administration will aim to emphasize the role of the women in society within all areas, including political and military independence. Furthermore, they will place equal importance on the environmental protection of the nation through the system of the democratic confederalism. Unlike other parties in the Rojava, East Kurdistan, PJAK does not believe that the nation-state system, which can cover all the society requests, a language, one language, one flag, one religion, and central system of the governing will work it doesn't work for the Kurds, because the Kurdistan have a much diversity, languages, religions, and beliefs. From the explanation we have given, it must be said that the future of the East Kurdistan depends on the outcome of other part of the Kurdistan. Perhaps the Lausanne Agreement in the last 100 years managed to create political borders between the Kurdish people and Kurdish land, but the unity of the Kurds in the face of the aggression from the governments of Iran and Turkey and ISIS reflect that fact that the Kurds are united in the face of the diversity under one land and one nation. As the Lausanne 100 years old agreement near in 2023, the risk of the genocide and cultural assimilation of the Kurds will double in the next few years. To avoid returning to the borders of the past 100 years, Iran and Turkey will spare no effort to suppress the Kurds, especially in Sanjar or Shangal, and autonomy of administration of Rojava. Unfortunately, the world powers have played a negative role in this regard. What is more important in the foreign policy of these powers is the economy issue. It can be clearly said that in the Middle East, the Kurds are truly a secular nation and respect all movement and beliefs. At PEJAG, we believe that one of the fundamental barriers against the democratization of the Middle East and the Kurds' access to their basis right is the fascist policies of the Turkish government to keep up the pressure on the Kurdish leader Öcalan, as long as the PKK as a liberation movement has been on the NATO terrorist list, which was the political decision, not a legal one. As long the genocide of the Kurds in northern Syria continue in the cooperation with the Islamic extremist force, the Islamic Republic will continue to make more pressure the Kurds in Iran and northern Iraq. In contrast, the PJAG OVA has spent the past 15 years organizing people in different groups, encouraging autonomy, solving the problems of the people in the region through the democratic discourse and increasing the pressure of the women. In politics, unlike many of the other parties whose the members belong only the specific parts of the one class or the small demographic of the society in Eastern Kurdistan, Rojava, the members and supporters of the PJAG consist of the different and diverse parts of the society, including many religions, beliefs such as the Zoroastrian, Yarsan, Shia, Sunni, and even welcome other nations of the Persia, Azeri, and Arab, and international community. This reflects PJAG commitment to diversity and equality. It should be said that PJAG accepts everyone as they are. We do not discriminate. This policy has made PJAG more widespread in the society of East Kurdistan, Rojava. In order to remove the effect of the regime, PJAG has established the democratic system. The name is KODA. The establishment of the East Kurdistan Democratic and Free Society, also known as a KODAR, is a social confederative system based on the right of self-determination. It formed the foundation which operated in a larger format outside of the political party. In the end, it should be said that the society of the east of the Kurdistan inside Iran is one of the most cohesive area of the struggle in Iran. In any event, the Kurds can better deal with the event based on the explanations of the past half century. It must experience experience of the past half century. It must be said that the way to democratize Iran depends on the progress of the East Kurdistan Rojava, the existing of the hundred of the civilian, women, and cultural environmental organizations of the hundred of the organizations under the worst oppressive condition is a proof of this fact. However, we need to be supported internationally, particularly as a Labour Party in the United Kingdom, and the PEJAK shares many ideological beliefs. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for Mr. Zardash for speech. Now I want to just go into another panelist, Mary Razi. He's one of them, just a representative of Kurdish National Congress.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for Labour to inviting us to this conference. So I will start my speech. Firstly, I would like to thank the Labour Party for inviting me and my two colleagues here today. The Kurdish population often found themselves without a platform to speak on. As such, their struggle and their continued threat of genocide do not gain attention to a situation that must be heard. In the UK and across the globe, Kurds inhabit and participate in the biosphere, a small area of the ecosystem in the Middle East will certainly impact the ecosystem here and elsewhere in the world. We cannot afford to ignore an entire continent because it is too much of a challenge. One of the greatest environmental disasters happening in the Middle East right now is the water shortages. While it plays a huge role in the hostile relation and conflict in the Middle East, it hardly features in Western analysis of the region due to political difficulty. Instead, the religions conflict are only considered through the lens of Kurdish religions and energy resources. Of course, those two subjects are of great interest to the West, primarily due to the links to global tourism and West energy security. However, water shortages is a ticking time bomb. Many studies have shown that ecocide can be a method of genocide if, for example, environmental destruction results in a condition of life that fundamentally threaten a social group's cultural and or physical existence. Water shortages and the resulting conflict could produce a wave of refugees. This will lead to human suffering and on an unimaginable scale, potentially leading to regional war, state clubs, and destabilizing regions for the field, such as Europe and South Asia. Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Syria have all openly committed to campaign of forced population transfers, where densely Kurdish populated areas are replaced with Arab, Turk, and or Iranians. Significantly, in 1962, the Ba'ath Party in Iraq organized a campaign to build a belt between Iraq and Syria. The aim campaign was twofold. One part was destroy land, which the party considered a strategic liability. The second part was to suppress the potential rebellion by forcing the agriculturally dependent Kurdish community out. Through environmental change, which gradually degraded the environment, causing it to become dry. This involved redirecting water from the Afrin River, strategically placed dams. Later, Turkey and Syria began to participate in similar campaign of ecocide. However, Iran campaign does not rely on Afrin River. Instead, it depends on an estimated 1 million deep and shallow wells, many of which are illegal with no regulation. The water then graduates downwards from the mountain through a vertical shift and delivered it to the surface via gravity. The water is then distributed through a survey of deliberately placed dams. The impact of those dams in Iran has been significant and negative. They have produced extensive shrinks in water bodies and reduction and downstream access to water. Only a few decades ago, Iran had one of the greenest land in the Middle East. Now the largest largest natural lake in the Middle East and the third largest in the world, Lake Urmia, has shrunk by 70% in only 5 years. Dr. Mansour Sohrabi most recent research showed that the natural wetland of Zireba are being damaged by excessive use of pesticides, which increase the volume of toxic algal blooms that cause eutrophication in the water. This in turn releases excessive amount of carbon dioxide. This changes the pH level of the water, increasing its acidity, causing the marine life to perish and the lake to dry out. As the environment degraded and the water crisis escalated, people have begun to protest against the government. In the Khuzestan region, there have been daily protests, described as the uprising of thirsty. The protests start on 15th of July in Khuzestan in response to the water crisis, but they quickly spread to other problems and turned to political. Protests in many cities are calling for the end of the current regime. It appears to have become a uniting factor for groups who normally sit on opposite sides. In Khuzestan, Hamadan, Khorramshahr, the majority of the water is redirected from Kurdish majority regions toward Basra in Iraq. The Iranian regime hopes that providing Iraq with water will help them make a political advance in Iraq. Ali Farsani, an official at the government office of Khorramshahr, declared that 150,000 liters of water is redirected daily. The rest of the water harvest from those regions is allocated to central Iran through a priority permit system. Commercial users are given priority to water access, followed by industrial, then urban areas such as Tehran, where water consumption in the country is 70% over and above the global average. Finally, consideration is given to the agricultures and rural resident areas, leaving little water for downstream irrigators and food producer in time of drought. Throughout 2008 and 2009, Iran experienced severe drought, which led to the evacuation of 50 villages in Kerman province due to water shortages. Dr. Ismail Karhum has highlighted that 80% of the Kurdish civilians, including those in Sistan, Balochistan, Kurdistan, have been driven out of their villages. Soil erosion caused by explosive and chemical use in mineral and energy exacerbation has eroded the soil and made the village uninhabitable. Internal displays will rise in the coming decade as prolonged drought condition, increased water shortages, and climate change devastated the environment. The displaced are numbered in the region of 22 million without their livelihood. Those agricultural workers found themselves without employer, and many turned to coal-mining to survive. This involves transporting incredibly heavy import on their back between the mountain region bordering Iran, Turkey, and Iraq, often weight 80 kilo. The Kurdish Human Rights Organization has data which suggests that IRGC killed 52 and 147 were injured in 2020. Those forward. Worsening the environment disaster facing the Kurds, the Iranian government has begun a campaign to destroy the vast hectare of forest in the mountains. Between May and June 2019, the forest in the Zakros mountain faced a raging fire, but the government did not attempt to put them out, and it was left to local Kurdish civilians with very limited resources to put them out. The voluntary have been seen putting out fire using a fabric, leaf blower, and pouring ash into the train track to prevent the spread. The head of the Department of Environment in Iran Parliament, Isa Kalantari, claimed that only 990 hectares of forest in the Zakros region were affected by wildfire last month, declaring we should not exaggerate it as though the whole country were burning. However, NASA satellite image showed that 950,000 hectares of forest had been burned. On 27th of August 2021, the Iranian Revolution Guard shelled the protected Shahor mountain and prevented voluntary from attending to the fire. This caused the village of Devana and Plangan in Kamiran to burn for days. A government official admitted this was an act committed to prevent the Kurdish opposition parties from using visitation to attack. This year in Mariban, there have been 258,000 hectare forest fire. This year in Mariban, there have been 258,000 forest fire with an estimated 200 hectares of damage. the Zerebar wetland burned for 2 weeks, with only civilian volunteers trying to put them out. On the other hand, they sent a fighting plane and 2 helicopters to aid Turkey forest fire. Information on true extent of damage, information on the true extent of damage to the environment is rare, partly because the government altered the figure. However, it is also because over the last 10 years, the government has pursued environmental activists and detaining them without any legal explanation, and often hold them in prisons for months at a time without trial. In the last few months, the number of environmental activists who have been detained has increased. From March 2021 until August 2021, 79 environmental activists have been detained. Considering Ibrahim Raisi report of crime against humanity, that number is set to rise under his presidency. Appointing hardliner Ibrahim Raisi to the position of presidency has indicated that Iran is considering its option for the succession to supreme leader. Throughout his political career, Ibrahim Raisi been linked to mass execution and other crime against humanity. In his previous role as a member of the Death Committee in 1988, he oversaw the disappearance and murder of between 5 to 30,000 political dissidents. The first disappearance act as a punishment for the family who live with the trauma of not knowing what has happened to their loved one. During the period which he was head of the judiciary and chief of justice between 2014 and 2020, he oversaw thousands of arbitrary detained, including political dissidents, journalists, peaceful protester, human rights defender, and member of ethnic and religious minority, and has systematically conducted unfair trial. According to a multiple report by the UN Human Rights Council, under his tenure, there have been approximately 3,400 executions. Those do not include the thousands who forcibly disappeared, or those killed during demonstrations, such as the demonstration in 2019, where 1,500 people were killed in only 1 weekend. In Iran government, the Iran government reached the extensive border abroad. The Abdul Rahman Bruman Center for Human Rights, ABC, has identified more than 540 Iranian, of which 350 were Kurds, who have been assassinated or kidnapped by Iran. Most recently, Iran's third diplomat, Asadullah Assadi, was sentenced by Belgian court to 20 years for his part in a plot to detonate explosives at a rally against the regime. Although this should be applauded as a step in the right direction, the reality is that Assadi is a drop in the ocean. A more realistic solution would be supporting the Kurdish opposition in a legal and political setting. The sanctions on Iran are not sufficient in themselves, particularly given the contradictory and weak political back. For example, in April this year, Iran was elected to the UN Commission on the States of Women's Rights, as it stands without concrete political back. The sanctions on their own have a significant proxy effect on the Kurds, who represent the most avowed opposition and the only real democratic opposition to the many autocracy. Yet Kurds face limited political leverage in contrast to the Iranian regime. The Kurds have never been linked to acts of terror and only use military aggressions as a defense when the Kurdish population are faced with genocide. The support is minimal and often weak. International community label our party as a terrorist in a bid to appease when they make a negotiation with the dictator. This must be stopped so real change can occur. One such a party is the PKK with a progressive democratic view and a reliable opposition which can truly challenge the autocracy, although this make a valuable ally. They must be removed from the list of foreign terrorist organizations in order to truly participate in advanced political dialogue. The Kurdish struggle for self-determination and democracy cannot continue with one arm behind its back. Kurdish parties must be allowed to present a unit face to defend and articulate itself, especially if they are to continue being a solution for democracy and a formidable force against the Iranian regime. It was so long. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Melody, for your speech. Last speaker, Sonia Karimi, her representative of Kajak, the woman of the community of free women of Eastern Kurdistan.
Hello, thank you for inviting me today. As my colleague mentioned, I am a representative of Kajal, which is the East Kurdistan's Association for Women. At Kajal, we believe that a truly free and democratic society is impossible without the emancipation of women. Women must have the autonomy and equal opportunities to participate and be represented in society, politics, and the law. Eastern Kurdistan is ruled and oppressed by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and crucially, we do not believe that we should wait for Iran's dictatorship to fall in order to protect the women and secure their rights. Consequently, networking with women's rights organisations in the Middle East and the wider international community forms a significant part of our work. There are also various campaigns to raise awareness and encourage change on a national and international scale. Current campaigns focus on social issues such as child brides, forced marriages, and domestic abuse. At the same time, we campaign in political areas such as activists who have been detained by the government and have had their human rights violated. Exploring the archaic laws imposed on females in the Islamic Republic of Iran society highlights the deep injustices and the extreme acts of cruelty women face. According to Section 1014 of the Iranian Civil Code, which is based on Sharia law, the legal age which a female can marry under the Islamic regime is 13. She can also be younger provided parental consent is obtained and the judge authorizes it. In addition, government-supported banks are offering financial incentives to marry. In a nation that's suffering extreme economic hardship, these marriage loans can be linked to a large spike in marriages, with the loans covering $23,000. The Center of Human Rights in Iran recently published data which shows the impact of these loans. For example, in 2018, prior to the mass rollout of these loans, the number of girls between the ages of 13 and 15 who received marriage loans was 51. Yet a year later, in 2019, concurrent with the increased availability of these loans, the number of loan recipients rose to 3,432 girls under the age of 15. The year 2020 concluded with 19,500 10 to 14-year-olds applying for these loans. The civil law also dictates that non-Islamic marriages cannot be recognised, which is discriminatory predominantly against the Kurdish population who follow a diverse variety of religions and beliefs. Strict social codes in the name of tradition and religion are used to deny women, and to a greater extent Kurdish women, their rights. Women who report rape face being locked up and accused of having committed a crime of zina. This is the equivalent of soliciting sexual services and or committing adultery. In the rare case in which alleged perpetrators of rape are prosecuted, they are often acquitted or given disproportionately lenient sentences that fail to reflect the gravity of the crime. This is in contrast to how women are subjected to the law. In June 2006, Shamama Rabbani was accused of adultery and sentenced to death by stoning, later reduced to 100 lashes. Hangout organisation reports that between March 2020 and March 2021, 29 women have been killed in instances of honour-based murder or family disputes. In response to these acts of violence and discrimination against women, Qajar launched a child marriages femicide campaign. This campaign will focus on networking with various women's rights organisations internationally to raise awareness and secure resources to support women who have fled. It will also endeavour to increase the pressure on the Iranian regime to change through a cohesive and practical strategy. Though these Kurdish political activists and women's rights activists face many challenges and barriers in their work. The Eastern Kurdish population is frequently subject to institutionalized racism within the regime. In 1979, the Ayatollah Khomeini declared jihad and issued a fatwa, this is a religious edict against the Kurds. Reflecting this, the regime's constitution states that the official language and script of the regime is Persian, and that official documents and textbooks must be in this language. Although it does not explicitly ban Kurdish, yet a number of teachers have been detained or face a death penalty for promoting Kurdish language and culture. Most recently, Zahra Mohammadi was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment as the regime perceived her classes to be a national security offence. Compounding this, over the years, many thousands of Kurdish activists have been detained, tortured, forcibly disappeared, and sentenced to death. Analysing the data from Hangar organisation this year alone, approximately 414 Kurdish political activists have been detained. Of those, at least 43 are female activists, facing an uncertain and terrifying future. In spring 2008, Shirin Alamhouli was detained and taken to the headquarters of the IRGC. There she was subjected to physical and psychological torture for 25 days, while the guards shouted commands and demanded answers, all in Farsi. Shirin couldn't understand nor speak Farsi. She spent 21 months in the notorious Evin prison. In one letter home, she describes the confusion she felt as she was interrogated and tried and convicted without once understanding the proceedings. In another letter, she explained how one interrogator kicked her so hard in the stomach she immediately threw up blood. Shirin Alamhouli was sentenced to death and executed in May the 9th, 2010, without her family or lawyers being informed. Her body has never been returned to her family, and the UN recognised it as a case of enforced disappearance. In another case, human rights activist Zainab Jalalian highlights the inhuman conditions and various human rights violations committed by the regime. Ms. Jalalian was arrested in February 2008 and subjected to 3 months of intense psychological torture and severe beatings. In December, she was sentenced to death for taking up arms against the Islamic regime of Iran. In 2010, this was reduced to life imprisonment after a series of appeals and campaigns. She has since been denied vital medicine and medical care and is gradually losing her eyesight. The poor hygiene in the prison has led to her contracting coronavirus alongside various gastrointestinal diseases. Furthermore, her lawyer, Amir Salah Dawoodi, has also been detained and sentenced to 111 lashes and 30 years in prison. With thousands of cases like this, it is understandable that despite having an engaged, well-informed and educated number of women who fervently want to participate and be heard, these women are weary, and rightly so. The environment that we're campaigning in is increasingly precarious. Our activists are neither safe in Iran nor are they safe abroad. We face a hostile and increasingly powerful dictatorship with many like-minded allies in the region. Meanwhile, internationally, we find that the intergovernmental organisations and politicians fall short of their promise to uphold human rights and promote international security, and often the language and discourse is contradicted by their actions. The issue of the Taliban and their invasion of Kabul has rightly led to international nations refusing to recognise Taliban rule so far. On the other hand, international position on Iran is contradictory to the stance against nations who pose a threat to international security and have committed war crimes. Iran poses a volatile security threat to the international community, which has been recognised in the form of a range of embargoes and sanctions relating to their uranium enrichment program. Yet, the United Nations made a remarkable decision during a plenary meeting in April to elect Iran to the Commission for the Status of Women. In this role, Iran has a legitimised seat in an institution that is supposed to promote gender equality and empowerment of women. It is an egregious affront to all women in this room and to all those who have sacrificed their lives and the security of their families' lives fighting for their rights in Iran. On a far greater scale, during the early days of the Kurdish Autonomous Administration in Rojava, having proven themselves to be reliable allies to the West and sacrificed over 20,000 of their own military, over half of which were women, in the fight against ISIS, the administration managed to defeat them and immediately created a small but significant space in the Middle East where women and men shared equal roles in society and participated in a social, political and legal setting. However, a small group of American personnel remained, with their presence alone deterring the Turkish invasion, until they abandoned post and, crucially, all the women who built Afrin, a village bordering with Turkey. This gave Turkey the confidence to invade, labelling the Women's Military Unit a terrorist organisation and proceeding to brutally kill hundreds of women in the military, desecrating and mutilating their bodies in the process. A short while later, the military and political support then pulled out from another village, Sedekani. Again, Turkey felt emboldened and invaded. This time they took a female civilian hostage, Cicek Kobani. They then proceeded to capture, brutalise and kill the female Secretary General for the administration, Havrin Khalaf. These events are significant for women in East Kurdistan, Iran. On the one hand, the United Nations calls for women to fight for their rights. It encourages women to believe that should they take the enormous risk and expose themselves as committing sedition against the dictatorship, the international community is there to support them. On the other hand, it shows how quickly they are willing to abandon women and undermine their efforts by offering Iran an influential seat at the Commission for the Status of Women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next meeting is after 3 minutes. Due to time restriction, we won't be able to any question or comment. The next meeting about just after 5 minutes, the future of politician and communication. If you just stay here or for another event, thank you so much for participating.